Welcome to the She Found Motherhood podcast. Today we have Dr. Rebekah Diamond, a pediatrician in New York City, joining us to answer parents' top 5 questions they have around vaccines and immunizing their wee little babies. This is a topic that's really close to both of our hearts, both because we truly believe in vaccines, but also because we were a little bit hesitant going in to vaccinate our little babies for the first time. So we get it. There's so much information out there and it's really hard to understand what to believe. So today we discuss those top 5 questions. Can't wait to get to it right after this quick reminder. Welcome to the She Found Motherhood podcast. We are Sarah and Alicia, 2 doctor moms who are creating a community rich with high quality information to support people through the journey from pregnancy to parenthood.
Our goal is to empower with knowledge and decrease the anxieties during this time in our lives. We cover topics from fertility through the 4th trimester, with the odd birth story sprinkled in.
Come join us on Instagram or Facebook at she.found.motherhood or check us out on our website at www.shefoundhealth.ca.
Some of these podcasts have been sponsored, which allows us to continue putting out free, amazing content. But don't worry, this won't affect our advice or recommendations, and we only partner with companies we know and trust, or have come highly recommended to us by you, our listeners. She Found Health is meant for general medical information only. The content of this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. The information you hear does not apply to every situation. If you have questions or if you've received different advice, please contact your healthcare provider. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health provider with any questions that you may have regarding a medical condition. The views expressed by She Found Motherhood and our guests are not representative of any institution with which we are affiliated. Well, everybody, welcome to the She Found Motherhood podcast. We are so excited to have Dr. Rebekah Diamond on the show to talk about the top 5 questions parents often have about vaccinating their little babies. So, Dr. Rebekah, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. So for those who don't know me, I'm a hospital pediatrician. I'm a board certified pediatrician working in New York City. I have a lovely daughter. I live with my husband and her, and I'm just really passionate about children's health. I'm also specifically passionate about kind of what it's like to be a parent and a pediatrician and the insight that has brought, and how I can help everyone on their parenting journey by, maintaining the good science we have, but not getting too caught up in all of the weeds of it all. So thank you again for having me. Can't wait to chat.
I know, I'm so excited. So you bring up a really good point though. I mean, I know so I do pregnancy care and care of young families. And before I had children of my own, before I was pregnant and had that experience, I would cite all the guidelines and the studies and have these conversations with people around those things. But after having my own kids, I've realized that it's so much more complex than just those guidelines and kind of the things that we're taught in medical school and residency. And by going through that experience, I think it adds so much more depth to our conversations with parents because we actually kind of can understand where they're coming from a little bit more. I'll tell you a quick story about me taking my firstborn in for his first sets of immunizations. And let me tell you, I am 100% pro all of the immunizations you can get, all of them. But even I, carrying my sweet little 2-month-old baby into his first set of shots, was questioning whether I was doing the right thing. Now, I talked myself into it. Everything was fine, but it was just such an interesting perspective that I had during that experience that I can now use to kind of help have those conversations with parents who are also struggling with that. Should we be doing this or not? What's the right answer?
No, I think that's absolutely such a good point. I had the same experience. I was already so outspoken about vaccines and how obsessed I am with them, how amazing they are, how excited I was for my daughter to be fully vaccinated. And even that first appointment, it was like, oh my God, you're going to put a needle in her. She's 2 months old. I don't want to put her down. I don't want to see her cry. It was, that whole thing. And even before that, which I think is kind of almost the light bulb moment that I had in realizing just how hard it is to sort through all the information that's out there these days. Even before that, I had, I'm very open about my struggles with postpartum anxiety and depression. I had breastfeeding issues. I had a lot going on just from my own mental health perspective. And I remember even in the first few weeks when my daughter was born, feeling like, oh, I can't do this. I'm so overwhelmed. How do I keep her safe? I'm so nervous. I looked online on all of the different parenting blogs and different sites, and it was kind of really shockingly easy to get into this rabbit hole of doubt and fear and anti-science information that even for me, I sort of had these moments where I was like, wait, am I wrong even about vaccines? Is there something that I'm doing that's going to hurt my daughter? And it was, if I hadn't been me, I think I probably would have gone a little bit down that rabbit hole. It was, after almost 10 years at that point of being a vaccine advocate, I was able to shut it down. But I can really see how just those early seeds of doubt and mistrust and misinformation, they really, really get in there really quickly and effectively. And so when we talk about parenting and how our perspective as a parent changes our perspective as doctors, that to me is like the biggest example of how we can really get sucked in and how we can fight it from our own doctor mom perspective.
Yeah. And the impetus for this podcast, you and I doing this together, again, thank you so much. I'm so excited. Actually came from a post on our Instagram site, our She Found Motherhood Instagram site. And somebody was questioning the vaccines in pregnancy, the COVID vaccine in pregnancy, and kind of effects on baby and breastfeeding. And you actually came into that conversation and started a dialogue with that person and brought it over to your site. And you had a really good dialogue with that person and actually kind of answered all of their questions, validated their concerns. And as a result, I think they actually changed their mind and went ahead and got the vaccination. And so that was the impetus for this, because I think we as healthcare providers forget sometimes, unless it's really close to our hearts, how hard it is to sift through that information. And we also, I know in Canada anyways, our system is not set up to have good amounts of time with our patients, to have really supportive, informed discussions. So that was the impetus for doing this podcast, is to kind of take some time and actually go through the biggest concerns and questions that parents often have and work through those together. So why don't we jump into it?
Let's do it.
I think the first question is, how do we know vaccines are safe?
That's of course going to be your first question, even if there weren't a ton of doubt out there and misinformation about vaccine safety. Anything that you do for your kid, you're going to want to ask your pediatrician or, your trusted network, especially your pediatrician, I hope, is this safe? Why are you recommending something that my child not only needs, but really is okay for them? The answer is vaccines are safe. And we know this because there is so much information, so much evidence, so much science, so much data. It's kind of one of the favorite gotcha moments of the anti-vax movement to say, we don't have randomized controlled studies, we don't have prospective data, we don't have anything that's really scientific and rigorous. It's really easy to debunk that in a matter of a few minutes. There is tons of data we have, starting from the 1950s with the early, polio trials that we were having. And when we had the polio vaccine, we did do randomized controlled trials. And that's immediately maybe we can put a pin in that and say, why would someone so confidently say there's no scientific trials or randomized controlled trials if you can look on Google and see that there's randomized controlled trials and scientific trials? So that's the beginning of the vaccine safety journey, and it only gets more awesome from there. There have been endless studies in safety in addition to the efficacy studies. An interesting thing that people are really seeing now that the COVID vaccine is front and center is we're seeing how the vaccine testing and safety process works. We are seeing, even with things that are as stressful and scary as the Johnson & Johnson pause, how rigorous the process is, how much we will in real time look at data from tens of thousands of people, escalating up to millions of people. And the minute something is concerning, do a huge pause, shut everything down, take a look at everything, and then go back up again once the lab and real world really show us that it's safe. So that's the big picture of how we know it's safe. We have now going on 60, 70 years of data really showing us how well children do with these vaccines.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. And I think the other thing to look at those kind of safety things, prospective studies. So that's looking back at people who have had the vaccines versus not, and looking at different concerns and issues that may have come up in one group, because I think that's a lot of the discussion that perhaps we're chatting with a little bit later about in terms of the whole MMR, measles, mumps, rubella, and the autism. And so they've done these huge looking back at, the Scandinavian countries and people who are vaccinated and not vaccinated, and looking at the differences. And so all of that information has actually been debunked because it was never real in the first place. And so I think we have to realize that our government is not out to kill our children. There is no benefit for that in them.
Yeah.
And so, or to harm our children. And so we really need to kind of look at both sides of the picture and really look at the data that they're presenting and understand it for ourselves, because it's such an important piece. And then
Yeah.
use that information to ask your care provider questions and to have those conversations with the people who you trust and who are knowledgeable in that area. Because it's one thing to trust a person, but if they actually don't have any good knowledge in that area or don't know how to look at scientific studies, it's that conversation can't always be taken with 100% truth. So the second question we were going to chat about is, will the number of vaccines overwhelm my baby's immune system? And can I space them out?
So this is a question I get all the time. I get it online, I get it in person, friends and family, I get it from patients. Like we were talking about, I think it's always important to take a step back and wonder, where did this idea come from? Who's promoting this idea? Why is this something that would even maybe be promoted as beneficial by anyone? And so we can kind of be very skeptical diving into this question just by looking at the fact that really it's the anti-vaccine proponents who have used this almost as a stepping stone to get parents to be more and more fearful of vaccines. And so the idea that, okay, the vaccines are, we can no longer argue that vaccines aren't safe. There's too much data against that. We can't argue that they don't work. There's too much awesome data they do. But let's think of something maybe a little more nebulous or a little more kind of scary in an unprovable way, and come up with something that just sounds kind of reasonable, right? Because it sounds reasonable if something is pretty good and pretty safe, but you're just maybe a little anxious about it, or you don't know, why not wade into it slowly or take a little bit more time with it? And it's a very reasonable sounding thing. The reason it's not a good idea is because the CDC schedule, and that's what we use in the United States, the Center for Disease Control, and really any regulatory schedule, it's designed to maximize your kid's immune response so that you are as protected from from these horrible diseases as quickly and safely as possible and as fully as possible. And there's no reason to worry to begin with at all that there's an overactive immune response, or that having an immune response early on is somehow bad. That's sort of like us in the defensive position of vaccines, that we've been backed into this corner of, oh, I guess it's okay, like, let's just go into it slowly. It's really not a good idea. You get vaccines early when babies are really, really young, because that's when they're most likely to get really sick and die from these diseases. And these diseases are no joke. I'm a hospital pediatrician, which means that unfortunately, not even unfortunately, really tragically, I've seen babies who have passed away from these things. These vaccine preventable diseases that are now coming back because we're not vaccinating as fully and early. So the answer is, it doesn't overwhelm the immune system. There's really no such thing in babies because of the way these vaccines are designed. It's a lot more vaccines than there used to be, but it's a lot less of the antigen. And the antigen is that part, for example, with the COVID vaccines, it's the mRNA or it's the adenoviral vector portion. It's the part that lets your immune system respond. There are many fewer of them. It's a smaller dose for all these vaccines because the technology is so much better, that there really is no overwhelm immune type picture, and delaying it just puts your baby at risk. And so you get, all you do is you defer benefit for really no scientific reason.
Yeah, and let's just chat briefly about, we'll take an example. So the pertussis vaccine or the whooping cough vaccine, right? We know that babies are most susceptible to having significant harm from that in the first 4 months of their life. So we have created these systems to protect them. I don't know how long you guys have been doing it in the States, but we've just started kind of immunizing pregnant people in the third trimester with the pertussis vaccine so that they can create immunoglobulins that they pass on to their baby through the placenta. So their baby has some semblance of protection in those first couple of months. And then they get their first immunization at about 2 months of age. And we know it takes about 2 weeks to create a good immune response to an immunization. So if we know that they're at their highest risk of having bad outcomes from pertussis in those first 4 months, and we're kind of, immunizing them for the first time at 2 months, and then it takes a couple of weeks, right? By delaying that even 2 to 4 weeks, we've kind of lost a lot of that protective window. And a lot of people are, by that 2-month mark, they're feeling more confident about getting out of the house, and they're not in these times of COVID, but they're getting out and they're going to pools, or they're going to shopping malls, or they're going to parties with their babies. And those are the places that these exposures often happen. So you're 100% right. The guidelines that our government and our public health officials and people who have trained for decades and decades to gain this knowledge and expertise are put out for our safety, for the safety of our children, and for the safety of our society. Okay, number 3. Sorry, I went on a bit of a rant there.
No,
Holy
it's
cow,
good.
Jenny.
It's just so important to keep remembering that these are babies. You know, they deserve protection. You are just trying to make the right choice as a parent, and you're getting a lot of crazy info out there. You're getting a lot of bad info, a lot of good info. It's all being shouted at you by various people. It's overwhelming, you know, at 2-month visit to say, oh my gosh, should I get these life-saving vaccines if someone is promising me they're dangerous? And I really empathize with that. And I know that you can make the right choices for your babies. We just have to, again, take that pause, listen to the good noise and get the bad noise out of here.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so next question. Why does my baby need to be vaccinated against diseases that we don't see anymore or aren't serious in kids?
Great question. And this is the heart of vaccine science and vaccine public health policy. This is the big kind of fact that underlies all of vaccine hesitancy that's out there. So I remember someone once told me much more eloquently than I'm about to say it, but something like vaccines have been the enemy of their own success, their efficacy. The idea that these vaccines are so good, that we have like so good that they can either fully eradicate disease, which we've seen rarely, but we've seen, for example, with the smallpox vaccine that doesn't need to be actively given anymore, or they can essentially eradicate disease if we maintain high levels of vaccination. And so it becomes this push and pull over time where you'll see this huge, horrible disease like a COVID, you know, is one example we're having in modern times, or even measles, which used to ravage communities. Polio is a great example of a disease that really destroyed childhoods, very similarly to what we see with COVID, the way polio affected just kids' ability to play and do things unrestricted, and children who died and were paralyzed. You know, it was a scourge upon, the globe, and it still is many places where they don't have widespread vaccine access. So you see these periods of just essentially plague. We get a vaccine, people, you know, in most political environments these days, it's been a little different, but usually people are just lining down the block after some period of a little bit of vaccine hesitancy, which we've always had. We had it with smallpox. We had it with polio. People were hesitant, but we get these periods of people lining down the block. We get widespread vaccination, and then the disease kind of disappears. And so when a disease isn't there looking really scary and reminding you of everything it can do, it's easy to not, even if you don't intellectually forget what they can do, to not viscerally feel the danger of them. And when that happens, it leaves this big opening for people who are anti-vaccine proponents, or people who are preying on the fear of the unknown and the nebulous idea that maybe something could harm you in a vaccine. They like to come in and say, well, I mean, you don't see polio around, but all you see is these claims I'm making up about the polio vaccine. So which one is more real? The balance kind of shifts. So that's a long way to say the reason we need to vaccinate is because vaccination is how these diseases stay away. We have these really awesome graphs. The awesome part is that you see when vaccination rates go up, then you see the disease just sort of like absolutely plummet. It's this really cool graph, and you'll see the number of deaths in children plummet as vaccination intake kind of goes up. Then you'll see the reverse graph, which we've seen in the past 20 years, where there's more declining of these vaccines. Measles is a really good example. When the MMR vaccine started to be declined, you see these huge outbreaks, and children absolutely suffer and die as a result of that. The main reason to vaccinate is because that's how you keep the disease away. That's how you protect against it, even if you don't see it in front of you.
In terms of that, can we talk a little bit about herd immunity and what that actually means? Because I think that's a part of this kind of question is, what is herd immunity, and why do we need herd immunity to keep our kids and our societies that we all live in and are a part of safe?
Herd immunity, in some ways, I feel like the pandemic has really helped kind of promote an understanding of herd immunity, but in many ways, it's still a very, very misunderstood topic. And it's a complicated topic, one that, you know, even not all doctors are fully versed in. And I certainly could learn a thing or two from epidemiologists. But the big picture, just like taking a step back, what does it mean to be immune as a society, to not be susceptible to these diseases? It just means that there's no way for the virus, or there's minimal way for a virus or bacteria to jump around. The best analogy is really with COVID is just precautions. Thinking about the fact that, masks stop the spread, but they're not getting anything down to 0%. So if I wear a mask, that helps. But if I wear a mask and you wear a mask, now there's really not a lot of a path for this virus to go to. If we're both outside, there's even less of a path. And then if we both are vaccinated, then there's like really no path for it to go to. So herd immunity from a big picture standpoint is just the idea that a virus or a bacteria, any sort of infectious disease, it needs people to go through. It uses them as its little touch point in transportation. So even if a vaccine is only, and I say only in like big quotes, only 95% effective, which is awesome.
That's very effective.
That's very awesome. That's like the measles vaccine or COVID vaccines. Those are our awesomest of awesome vaccines. There's never going to be 100% effective anything. That's just not how science and bodies and biology work. Some people will have a completer response than others. Some people will be unable to get vaccines because certain live vaccines aren't safe for them, or they have had one of the very, very few rare reactions that make it something that they shouldn't get. The idea is that a disease can only spread if people are going to carry it and spread it. And if I'm in a group of 10 people and I have the vaccine, for COVID, well, that's great. I'm 95+% less likely to get it. And there's a very low chance I'll get it. But it's still possible, of course, because if everyone else in that room doesn't have a COVID vaccine, maybe they have it and maybe it's just something about me is unlucky that I'm able to get it. But if 9 out of the 10 people in the room and me, so if all of us have the vaccine, well, the odds of someone getting it and then giving it to me as a fully vaccinated person, they start multiplying and getting really, really small. And when that happens enough, we talked about pods and cocoons and these little bubbles. When bubbles expand and get big enough in a society, we call it herd immunity, because there is essentially so much protection and so much, physical and immune distance between people that the virus or bacteria just doesn't have anywhere to go. And so it kind of goes away. Yeah, until there's a break in the defense.
Exactly. Yeah. And even if you were vaccinated and exposed and got it, your disease would actually be much, much, much milder than if you hadn't have been vaccinated in the first place. So there's a lot of kind of talk about, well, people still get it despite being vaccinated. Sure. Yeah, it's still around and somebody will still get it, but their bad outcomes are much less likely, and it's going to be a much milder disease if they do get it. So they're still getting a huge amount of protection from that vaccination.
Yes, that's such an important point too.
Yeah.
Especially as a pediatrician who sees with these diseases that are so scary, both short-term and long-term with kids. I see that the children who do, for example, maybe they get measles, even if they have been vaccinated, but there's an outbreak in the community, they're not going to get these horrible, horrible things that can happen 5, 10, 15 years later that are fatal. That's the classic example with needles and something called SSPE. If you're vaccinated, you don't get it. So even if you do have measles, you're the unlucky 1% who gets it, as the barrier and protection from the vaccine, you're going to still live a long and healthy life once you recover. And that can't be overstated. It can't be overstated.
It can be understated, but it
is understated.
And the same with chickenpox, right? We've got a really robust chickenpox vaccination, which a lot of people are like, well, chickenpox isn't that bad. Why should we be vaccinated? I remember having chickenpox as a kid. It sucked. And I was like 6. Like, I don't remember much, but that I remember. So the kids now who are vaccinated who get chickenpox get this little weird rash on maybe like one part of their leg, rather than having a full body, horrifically itchy, scarring potentially rash, right? Even for the mild chickenpox, it was so chronic.
Yeah,
I remember.
Not to mention shingles, not to mention any disease that we can vaccinate against. I think this is really the crux of it all, and getting to this point, it's actually probably segueing into some questions I'm sure we will be asked. But if there is a disease that we can vaccinate against, it is worth vaccinating against. And I say that based on the hard science that's out there, the children I've seen, both unvaccinated and vaccinated, and the data behind it, and also just a little bit of common sense. Making a vaccine is a big investment. It's a lot of time. It's a lot of money. A lot of resources go into it. Maintaining the distribution. It's a very expensive undertaking that you don't even have to like the government or support them or think they have your best interests at heart, to know that the reason they're supporting it and making these things universally, encouraged, affordable, accessible, is because it's much less expensive to do this very highly expensive thing than it is to deal with the really, really horrible outcomes that come from it. And so just remember, suffering, disease, those are horrible things that children don't want. Those are also expensive things that a government doesn't want to pay for. So they've made this assessment, maybe not out of the goodness of their heart, but they've made this assessment. And I think that kind of is okay to be reassured by it, that, they know that they want to protect me so that it doesn't become expensive down the line. Well, they must really think that these things work and are safe.
And are worth the money. Yeah. And that kind of segues into our fourth question nicely. Is natural immunity better?
No. I will answer it much more in depth than that. Although if that's enough for you, that's fine. It's not better. And again, COVID is giving us a real world, real time play by play of why natural immunity is not better. We are seeing such horrible things, short, medium, long term with COVID. We're seeing it mostly in adults. We're starting to see it in kids. These are just really, like I said, these are things that are worth preventing and avoiding. And these are things you don't get with a vaccine. You just don't get them. It's kind of awesome. The way that the science works is that you have this really targeted, smart, effective, localized immune response that your body does. So it gets all the benefits of being vaccinated, of seeing the disease or the bacteria, the virus. It gets all of it and it can make that awesome memory, but it doesn't have that huge widespread inflammation. And the widespread inflammation you'll see with any sort of virus or bacteria, that's what hurts your organs. That's what happens, causing problems down the lines. In addition, a lot of these viruses are really nasty and scary, and they just like to hide in your body. Chickenpox does that too. And that's why decades later, you can have shingles. Measles will hide somewhere in the depths of your brain cells. It's horrifying. It's like a horror movie. And then in 15 years can come out and be fatal. I mean, that doesn't happen with a vaccine. It doesn't matter how you slice it or what, misinformation is being spread out there. It just doesn't happen. But you do get all the full protection. You might need boosters because you need to get a little bit of a stronger response or a longer lasting response, because we've done that trade-off. We're doing less of the antigen. We're doing less of that huge, widespread, kind of uncontained immune response. The trade-off is that we might need to get them more frequently and get those booster shots. But the trade-off is totally worth it, because you can know that 5-10 years down the line, you're not going to have something really scary lurking in your body that can come back and hurt you. So no, the natural conversation about natural being better and chemical not being good and toxic versus non-toxic, I mean, that's a really huge topic to dive into, but it all centers around something that's called in psychology, the naturalistic fallacy. And as exciting as this sounds, it's very exciting to me. I love this topic. But the gist is that it's really human to think that things that are natural or somehow found in nature or plant-based, to think that they're somehow morally better or better for your health. It's really human, because we evolved in a time where plants were probably a lot better than a pile of some sort of toxic goo that was out there. And so your brains evolved that way, but your brain didn't evolve in a time when really there was no difference between them, which is where we are now, because we've spent decades and centuries looking at all the different molecules and different particles and so-called chemicals. And we know which ones that are in a leaf of a plant are the same that's in a pill. We know that there's no real cutoff between where nature ends and science begins. It's all just atoms. It's all molecules. And we get to choose which the good ones are that go in our body and which the bad ones that are. And a natural virus, a natural bacteria is really scary and bad, even if it's natural. An quote unquote unnatural vaccine that's targeted to make my body super prepared to handle, the threat of the actual bad guy virus if it comes my way. That's actually really good. And I like that. So that's why no thank you to natural immunity. I will always take the vaccine.
And we can control how much of that little virus goes into our body with a vaccine, so we can not completely overwhelm our immune system with being exposed to a big old sneeze of measles right in our face, right? And so,
Yeah.
yeah, having some control is actually a good thing.
No,
I'm
I
gonna
love that. Yeah.
I'm gonna actually also bring up another point, which is I don't think we often think about it until we're in the situation. But the other piece of the puzzle is what an effect it can have on your life when your child is sick during that period.
Mm-hmm.
So even if your child, I'm gonna again bring back chickenpox, right?
Mm-hmm.
If your child gets chickenpox in a very mild form, they're out of school for a week. You're home with them for a week. They're
Mm-hmm.
whiny and miserable for a week. You've lost a week of income. You have to figure out how to, in my world, I have to figure out, I have 400 appointments that now have to get rebooked. And those people couldn't see their doctor because maybe not 400, maybe 200 appointments.
A
And
lot.
that inconveniences them, those other 200 people, because now they have to reschedule, get another appointment, figure out all those pieces of the puzzle. So just from a purely logistical, societal kind of inconvenience point of view, taking half an hour to go get my child their chickenpox vaccine and maybe having a bit of a crummy night because they have a little bit of a fever while their immune system is ramping up is way more convenient and way less
Mm-hmm.
costly to me than having them sick for an entire
Mm-hmm.
week. Not to even talk about their well-being during that time, right?
Right.
So I think we often don't even think about just that if we want to take that convenience as a parent to not having a sick child and all of the ramifications that that has. Not that
Mm-hmm.
that should be your reason for getting vaccinated or not, but it certainly can come into play a lot, especially for people who don't have the luxury of having sick time or
Yeah.
being financially stable, right? If you're living paycheck to paycheck and you don't have a super supportive workplace, that could for some people mean they lose their job,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
All right, so we kind of talked a little bit about this. Number 5, question 5. We're doing a really good job of segueing. What about all of the other vaccine ingredients? I'm not worried about the active part of the vaccine, just all of the chemicals and toxic preservatives.
Yeah. This is again, as the anti-vaccine arguments get debunked through just like simple science and facts, there's this thing called moving the goalpost. It's a logical fallacy, meaning it's an argument that seems like it's smart and seems like it's on point, but it really just detracts and distracts from what's going on. And so you'll see this, like we talked about with the spacing vaccines. You'll sort of see the pro-vaccine argument sit in a defendant position and continue to get its way out of this defendant position that it doesn't really even need to be in. And then the prosecution, which is this not particularly above board anti-vax, misinformation machine, come and say, oh, okay, fine. The antigens are fine. You're right. It's okay. But what about all the aluminum in it? Did you think about that? And then you'll answer that, which I'm happy to answer, and I will. And then they'll say, yeah, but like maybe it's all too much at once. So maybe you should space it out. And so you'll just see it. You'll notice that the more concerns you answer, the more concerns you'll probably have. I think that's totally okay to have so many worries and questions. I think that's totally valid. I get it. I don't want you to get too caught up in the fact that, well, why are there new concerns for each concern that's sort of reassured against as some sort of indictment against vaccines? It's just a strategy, and it's an effective one because it keeps you thinking and worrying and talking about these vaccines. The reality is all the ingredients are safe. When I say they've all been tested and that they're all safe, I don't mean just the antigen and the dosing of that. I mean every single ingredient. And so there's really morally below board, really upsetting accounts that are designed to say, well, just read the inserts or just look at the ingredients. Look, they have these long names. And then there are these great accounts that debunk that. And they say, well, look at the ingredients of an apple, and you'll look and it'll say formaldehyde and it'll say XYZ acid and XYZ this. I mean, you can make anything look scary if you use its chemical compound name. You can make anything look good if you don't. If I called this is all natural vaccine because it only has aluminum, which is found in excellent quantities in breast milk and is a normal part of a baby's diet, I could say that, and that's true. But it's also, that's me manipulating the facts that there's metals everywhere. There's preservatives everywhere. These are just words that you can use to frame that. So the biggest ones that we get questions about are things called adjuvants and preservatives. You also get some questions about things that are called stabilizers. The bottom line is these are just the things that either let you use a smaller amount of antigen. So like we talked about, so you don't have that huge immune response, you can just use a smaller amount. And there's something called an adjuvant that makes it work a little better. The most famous one is aluminum. Again, the amount of aluminum you will see in all the vaccines up until 6 months is less than any breastfed or formula fed baby will have from that. So it's just not a reasonable concern to be pushing on parents, but of course it's a reasonable worry to have if someone says, I'm injecting your child with aluminum. It sounds scary, but it isn't. The stabilizers are sort of similar, and they don't actually make you use less of an adjuvant, of an antigen, but they're part of the process of making sure that it can last. And stabilizers like polysorbate and other similar ones, people have sort of made a lot of false claims about it. But again, these are really common food stabilizers. So if you eat ice cream, you probably have more polysorbate than you do from your vaccines. And I hope you eat ice cream as long as you don't have or a vegan version of ice cream, whatever it is. More ice cream, less worry about polysorbate because it's everywhere and it's not dangerous in any of the quantities it is in anything. And then the famous one is really a preservative. Preservatives are when you have multi-dose vials, so you need to keep using the same bottle for a vaccine, so you only see it with some vaccines. That's thimerosal, and that has a whole dirty political history behind it, where, at least in our country, the FDA took it out of vaccines for a little bit because anti-vaccine lobbyists did a really good job of making people afraid of it. And so the FDA said, okay, we'll take it out. Will you leave us alone? And of course, the opposite happened because people said, oh my gosh, you took it out? I can't believe that you acknowledged that it was bad. So that was a pretty murky, not so great series of political events that happened. But the bottom line is thimerosal is also not dangerous. People will say it's mercury. It's not mercury. It's a compound that has some properties that are similar to it. Again, if you have fish, you have more mercury than you do from anything that would ever be in a vaccine. The dose makes the poison. If apples have cyanide, apples have formaldehyde. I just can't stress enough that if someone is sitting there and saying, just read the inserts, I would love for you to challenge and say, yeah, okay, great. Let's read the inserts together. Can you tell me what each of these things is? Can you tell me what the normal amount is that you would have in your diet without vaccines? Can you tell me what the known effects are in humans at the dose that is listed? Because when I've had those conversations with people who are more maliciously spreading anti-vaccine information, they don't have the answers to that. It's just fear. And it's understandable to be convinced by the fear. I really get it. I really understand the amount of information that you're up against. Just know that it is not based in science, and it's not based in what's best for your baby.
Yes. Awesome.
That was a long one. I could talk about this forever.
That's a great, it's just such a good perspective, and just discussing kind of where we find it in nature, and that we're already consuming these things, is such an important thing to recognize as well. Okay. I have one last question for you. And my question comes from a true place of curiosity because I actually do not understand it. Where do you think what is the goal of anti-vaccine people who are spreading this? I mean, I can understand if somebody is fearful for themselves or for their child and making a decision for themselves or for their child, whatever that decision is, that's your decision to make, and you do your research. But what is the benefit to these groups, these lobbyists who are actively trying to infiltrate our society and undermine the health of our society through these widespread campaigns? What is the benefit of them? Or what is their goal, I guess?
Yeah. It's such a great question, because you should always be wondering, whenever you get information, what are your conflicts of interest? What is the agenda that you're trying to spread? You should ask me that, to my face, and I will be very open with the fact that I'm a salaried pediatrician who makes no money off of vaccines either way. And that's the case for most.
Well, let's be honest, you make money off unvaccinated children because you have to care for them and keep them alive.
To be honest, if you had to look at it and say what benefits me more in terms of my numbers and my census and my ability to generate revenue, yeah, I would make more money off of unvaccinated kids. That's totally true.
But morally and ethically, I suspect that is not your guidepost.
But no, it doesn't appeal to me to make money off of sick kids. If it just doesn't occur to me to want to do that as a human. Also, this is a weird way to go about that, to spend the past decade, spending so much time and energy and, sacrificing income and time with family to try to take care of kids. If I was just going to use it to make money that I'm not even making, it doesn't really add up. The thing with any sort of profiteer is that it's about money and status. And, vaccines, there's the misinformation, which is sort of like the Facebook, this and that, and my friend told me this, and I'm worried about that. And then there's the disinformation. And the distinction is important because disinformation is someone sitting there sort of twirling their mustache and saying, I'm going to spread bad information so I can make money. And maybe I'll convince myself that it's good in the process. There are plenty of people who have push some really, really awful agendas and justify to themselves or even convince themselves that it was the right thing to do. But there is an intention. The intention is to make money. Anti-vaccine information is extremely profitable. Extremely profitable. How? I mean, it seems like it's just free on the internet. Well, the reality is that there's like a big 12 of anti-vaccine. There are these really kind of bad actors who have spread so much of this information, are responsible for like 70-something% of the Facebook posts content on anti-vaccine. They all make a lot of money through a variety of different things. The most famous thing that they do, the most common thing, is they sell a product. And usually it's a quote unquote like vaccine alternative. So Joseph Mercola, who I will call out by name because I will happily have him get subtweeted by me on this podcast. He has done some bad stuff, and he has said that vaccines are not safe, vaccines are dangerous, but he sells a product that is apparently, or allegedly an alternative to vaccines. It's really expensive, and it's vitamins. It's just really expensive vitamins. But he's a billionaire, or at least a millionaire, several times over. And similarly, other influencers who get followers and then are able to do promotions, you might notice that they do a lot of partnerships with different products that sort of you would be more likely to buy if you didn't like vaccines, or if you were told vaccines aren't an option for your kids' health. So if it's someone who's spewing this and promoting this and then says, oh, by the way, all you need for your immune system is my vitamin C complex for kids, I mean, that should be kind of a red flag right there. That maybe it's not the vaccines. Maybe they just want you to buy the thing that they want to have you buy. So I wish I had a less kind of depressing, infuriating answer than that. But it's good to know. It's good to know that these people, I mean, really don't have your best interest at heart. If they did, maybe they would give it away for free. If they really knew something about vaccines, or maybe they would expose the cover up. Maybe they do something about it with their money. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's sad.
It's the sad state of affairs where we're profiting off illnesses of our children, of our community children. Well, kind of a depressing note to end on.
Sorry.
But really good information. And I think, I think we really addressed a lot of the questions that come up day to day for us, right? In our offices with our practices. And I think it's really important that people who are listening to this podcast, parents, recognize that we understand where your concerns come from. We've been there. Maybe it's not for vaccines. Maybe it's for something else around our children's health, right? Mine is trampolines. Oh my gosh, my kids would love a trampoline, but I am so scared they're going to fracture their femur or their arm from it because I see it all the time. So I will never get my children a trampoline, and they hate me for that. But I'm coming from a place of actual concern for my children. We get that. We understand completely that that's where you're coming from. And so it's really important to talk about your concerns so we can address them and discuss them and have a respectful two-way conversation around those things. And then at the end of the day, ultimately, it's still your decision to make because they're your child and you have their best interest at heart. And we respect that, but we think it's really important for people to come in understanding the facts and understanding all of the history that's behind this. And unfortunately, part of that understanding is, why are the anti-vaccine people still so prominent in our society and our culture? And that discussion around that profiteering, and maybe they truly believe what they're doing, but it all comes from the start of that kind of profiteering, or that start of not having a good, honest, informed discussion with a care provider. So thank you for going through all those questions. That was incredible. And where can we find you on the World Wide Web if we are looking to ask questions or learn more about these things? Where can we get a hold of you?
Yeah, thank you so much. Please come find me on the internet. I live on Instagram and my handle is @parentlikeapediatrician. I'm teaching you how to parent like pediatricians either do or wish they could do. We're on this journey together. Please send me a DM, follow me, reach out if there's anything I can do to help you with this vaccine journey or anything else parenting related.
Awesome. And we'll make sure to put your handle in the show notes below. All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Rebekah, for chatting with us from across I was going to say country, but you're in a different country. We're like crossing two
down south.
East Coast, West Coast, Canada, US. We're all coming together. It's amazing. It's amazing.
It's wonderful. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening. Make sure to check out our website at www.shefoundhealth.ca and to sign up for our community for weekly bump blasts. Make sure to check us out on Instagram or Facebook at she.found.motherhood and head on over to your favorite podcast app and leave a review and a 5-star rating. If you enjoyed this podcast, take a pic of yourself listening to it and share it on social. Make sure to tag us on it so we know to keep making them.